Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well, safe and sound, wherever you are. Hold on. This episode I'd like to dedicate to getting the perfect amount of sleep. If you'd like to learn more about this and other fictional concepts that don't exist, all you have to do is ask somebody else. 'Cause I don't freaking know. Anyway. Let's start. Welcome to Several Stories High, an eclectic, electric anthology of fiction, fact, and everything in between. I'm your host, Nathaniel David Knox. Shall we begin? The City of Angels, the City of Light, the Big Apple. I don't need to tell you the real names of these places because you already know. I mean, who doesn't? But what comes to mind when I say the Butterfly City? Now, I'm sure there's 1,000 towns that all probably claim this moniker for their own, but there's only one true Butterfly City, to me at least, and that's Wexler, USA. I've always been fascinated with origin stories, especially when it comes to the names of things and places. I'm not sure why. Probably because no matter how far down you have to dig to find it, each name leads back to a person or a group of people no different than you or me, all finding themselves as but a tiny little blip in time on this earth, and leaving whatever thing they named as a reminder, a little legacy for the rest of us, be it a city or a simple signature. Why else would it be so interesting that Los Angeles is called the City of Angels, if not for the fact that at some point, if only for but a little tiny blip, we wonder if there really are celestial beings just beyond our reach? But maybe I'm the only one who wonders that. Or Paris, the City of Light, a name coined during the Age of Enlightenment, a title that conjures a beautiful romanticism at the mere mention of it. A metropolis of light, from every corner cafe and park street lamp to the very glimmering tree-lined sidewalks of Les Champs-Élysées. Pardon my French. No, really, I know it's not that good. Even the Big Apple makes you curious. Or at least it makes me curious, simply because it brings up perhaps one of the simplest of human needs. Food, sustenance, survival. A sweet, plump, red, fresh fruit right off the tree. All this to say, I like learning the stories behind random things, even things like city nicknames, because most of the time it leads back to someone, or several someones. People stories, as Ray Bradbury would call them. Which brings us right back to Wexler, USA, the Butterfly City. How'd it get that name? Well, that too started with someone. Two someones, actually. Priscilla and Edmond Moore. When I first discovered their story, I was reminded of the Frank Sinatra lyrics. It was just a neighborhood dance. That's all that it was, but oh, what it seemed to be. Except this story dates back much further than even Frank's time. Way back to Kent County, England, at Boswell Manor, about 5 miles northeast of Seven Oaks, on a cool, crisp fall evening in 1870. Anyways, they met at a dance. But it was only their eyes that met for the majority of the evening. They were both shy, young, inquisitive people, both stealing glances at the other from across the crowded ballroom of waltzing lovers, only to dash their eyes away at the last moment, trying to catch the other in the act without getting caught too, as if playing some Victorian-era game of chicken. Priscilla Paxton was a young American woman of 19. She was visiting the UK on account of her father, Chauncey K. Paxton, a well-liked Wexler, USA businessman and co-founder of the Ironside Railway Company, who would also later become the mayor of Wexler. But as Chauncey Paxton schmoozed with the upper echelon of Southeast England, Priscilla was too busy waltzing to chamber string music with more young men she couldn't have been less interested in. She didn't want to dance, at least not then. She was more interested in the garden behind the manor. Most of the men who danced with Priscilla thus far might have thought she never danced a day in her life because of her preoccupancy. But Priscilla was actually quite well versed in social dances such as these. Soon she became doubly distracted by the only person skilled enough to catch her eye. As the music began to fade, Priscilla was convinced that she was through dancing with people. But there was still one more. Edmond Moore. This particular ball was invitation only, meaning some of the rules and etiquette for the time were more relaxed than, say, a grand ball. But nevertheless, Edmond Moore, 22, dark hair combed and curled back, bowed to Priscilla with a slight flutter in his chest. He felt as if he'd been bowing for an eternity, the lapels of his dark blue tailcoat swaying to the breeze being let in from the balcony. Priscilla pondered. She noticed the tiny beads of sweat atop Edmund's forehead, which glinted from the light of the roaring fireplace. She thought he was handsome, but the world is full of handsome men, right? Even more important to her was that he was kind. At least from Priscilla's brief ballroom observations, she'd seen Edmond talk to all the older attendees who stood on the outskirts of the dance, listening to them reminisce with a genuine interest on his face, not to merely humor what many regarded as the old guard, but to listen and care. Priscilla cracked a grin and finally took Edmund's damp hand. It comforted her to know that he was just as nervous as she. They waltzed with the music and the other merry couples all around them. It was an odd feeling for them both, to be so shy and yet so inextricably bound by music and dance to someone you didn't know at all. After chuckling for several awkward moments, Priscilla had an idea. She looked for her father, all the while keeping in step with Edmond. Chauncey K. Paxton was gabbing away with Sir Boswell himself, no doubt casting his charming spell like he did so well over potential investors. Then Priscilla eyed the balcony. Even though the evening was an autumn one, the door to the balcony was still left open slightly, teasing a view of the back garden in its final glimmers of twilight. Priscilla whispered to Edmond, who laughed, only in a dumbfounded, skeptical sort of way. But he didn't need much convincing. Her teal, signature San Francisco seafoam ballroom gown and amber eyes and jade earrings and matching jade locket all complemented each other with a contrast and coalescence no one could ignore, which had all already done the young man in. Edmond nodded to Priscilla in agreement. A few more awkward whispers later, and their scheme was set. As the music and merriment played on and the fire played and danced and crackled on too, Priscilla and Edmond slowly, strategically, and secretly began waltzing closer and closer towards the balcony. Then Priscilla gave Edmond a, "It's now or never," sort of glance. Edmond nodded. As the strings soared and glided, so did they, twirling and dancing properly straight out of the ballroom onto the balcony. Once they confirmed that none of the other guests had seen them, they laughed. They laughed like two people who'd known each other for a dozen lifetimes. Priscilla, feeling especially unorthodox for the time, gently led Edmond over to the old stone railing on the far side of the balcony, out of sight. They both looked out at the vast landscape behind Boswell Manor. Lush trees were swaying, as if attending the ball inside, or perhaps it was the other way around. The newborn moonlight reflected on all the rows and rows of flowers and little trails and ponds and what seemed to be miles of flat moonlit grass. They didn't speak for some time. It was enough to just bask in all the beautiful little things. Soon they began to talk of how they both didn't care much for these sorts of ballroom galas. Then they talked of everything that came to mind in no particular order or logical sequence. One might have thought it even odd. They skipped the usual formalities, leaping right over place of birth, siblings, things of that sort, zooming right past Priscilla's American accent or whether or not Edmond would follow in his father Horatio's footsteps and become a physician. No, they skipped straight to the important things. Whether coffee or tea was better, of rainy days or sunny ones, of reading a good book for a laugh or for a fright, or what the moon must look like on that other darker side, whether Christmas morning made you happy or sad or both. whether or not this was all there was and ever will be, whether or not there really, really, really was a world beyond the one we could touch, see, and feel, of the heavens and heaven. They spoke of their greatest fears, and it was the same for them both. Death. That ironclad, horrifying fact that everyone living will one day cease to be. Not to mention the generations and generations and generations who've already left this earth, long gone to the sands of time. I've heard it said that every good story needs some sort of conflict, some kind of problem to compel those on the other end of it. Well, what more of a problem could you ask for? The problem of death. Death and dying. But Priscilla and Edmond's discussion didn't stay somber for long out on that balcony. As violins continued to croon and hum back inside, the two were much too astounded that they were sharing such a good conversation to let any subject dampen their little talk. Even death. They continued to converse as if they had 1,000,000 years of catching up to do, their words burning and providing more warmth than the vast, crackling fire back inside ever could. Priscilla returned to America 4 days later. Over the next year and a half, there was no less than 15 letters between Priscilla and Edmond. Of course, letters took weeks to travel across the pond in the late 1800s, and they both couldn't reply to each other fast enough, their hands cramping and pen tips all but aflame with fervor and a burning, blossoming love. Their correspondence was full of everything under the sun, from the sad to the silly, the serious, the spiritual, all of it, as if they never stopped their conversation back at Boswell Manor. It was around the 5th letter or so that Priscilla wrote those words every person longs for. I love you. A brief excerpt of Edmond's response is as follows, and I'll spare you the agony of hearing me butcher a proper British accent, so just imagine these words being read in a deep, longing English accent, a la Hugh Bonneville or Jim Carter or something, yes? Edmond's response to Priscilla's first I love you letter began with these words. My dearest Priscilla, should I crash to the floor from the sudden and joyous elation your letter has brought me, let me take these last few conscious moments to say, I love you more. And after what seemed to Edmond like an eternity of weeks went by, Priscilla's reply came in the post, an excerpt of which I'll read for you now. My dearest Edmond, before I waste another drop of ink from this little fountain at my side, I must inform you that you are quite mistaken. It is I who love you more. Priscilla Paxton, the clever, playful wordsmith that she was thanks to the teachings of her late mother, spelled the phrase ILOVEYOUMOORE, a lovely little ode to Edmond's last name that certainly sealed the deal for them both. The final excerpt I'll read for you is from Edmond's reply soon after. My dearest Priscilla, it is truly an unfair thing to use such wit and whimsy in manners of love and last names. A victory you have so eloquently achieved. I see it only fair that we rectify our current predicament by evening the odds, as it were. Will you do me the eternal honor of permitting me to say, I love you more, too? Edmond also spelled it M-O-O-R-E. Early on in their engagement, Edmond decided he'd come to live in America. So he convinced Priscilla to scout out the perfect place they could both soon begin their wedded life together. Priscilla's father, Chauncey, purchased the young couple a 100-acre plot of land that Priscilla had fallen in love with a few miles northeast of Wexler. Chauncey K. Paxton claimed that he spent so lavishly on Priscilla and Edmond because of a silly bet he and Priscilla had made while smoking cigars. No, really. Whoever could keep the ash from falling the longest would win the land. But even if Chauncey hadn't won the bet, he'd spare no expense for his only daughter either way. She was the last living legacy and reminder of his late wife, Tessa, who passed away from tuberculosis when Priscilla was 9. The house was built quickly. It was a grand country estate, more like a small castle, a Jacobean-style abode with a beautiful green oaken front door and ample drawing rooms and sitting rooms and a library and beautiful spiraling banisters and a back balcony and enough land to eventually plant as many beautiful things as Priscilla could dream of. On May 22nd, 1872, Edmond and Priscilla were married at St. Christopher's Cathedral on Marigold Street in Wexler, USA. The reception was a grand and glorious affair, according to the Wexler County Times. Edmond and Priscilla were in love with each other and the beautiful new world around them in their little country castle. Everything seemed a few shades brighter, at least for a little bit. In 1874, Priscilla's father, Chauncey K. Paxton, was elected mayor of Wexler. He won by a landslide. Much of the city adored him for his good humor and peacemaking approach. City council even voted to name one of the sections of the city after him, still known as the Chauncey Quarter, or simply Chauncey to this very day. Yes, it was safe to say that most of the residents of Wexler liked him, except for Langston Howard, of the notorious Howard family, one of the oldest and most powerful of the old Wexler families that ran the corrupt and cutthroat Wexler political machine, also known as Big Old Howard, for obvious reasons. And Big Old Howard didn't take too kindly to the idea of anything or anyone interrupting the operation of that powerful political machine. After just 5 months in office, while giving a speech to commission the newly built Halifax Bridge, Mayor Paxton was gunned down by 3 masked assassins. Both Priscilla and Edmond were in the crowd when it happened, horrified and dumbstruck. At the age of 58, Priscilla's father, Chauncey Kendall Paxton, died. No suspects were ever named or questioned. Not even 2 whole years of beautiful domestic bliss thus far could shield Priscilla or Edmond from disaster. It seems death knocks on all doorsteps, even the beautiful green oaken ones. Of course, Priscilla was devastated. Who wouldn't be? Edmond was devastated too, grieved not only by the loss of his beloved father-in-law, but also because there was nothing he could really do but sit in the sadness and sobs and sporadic silences, comforting his wife as best as he could, as best as anybody could. Priscilla would later reveal to Edmond that her jade butterfly locket was a gift from her parents, picked out by her mother. "You're as beautiful as a butterfly, Priscilla, inside and out," her father would always tell her before she went to sleep each night. But now her father was the one sleeping, and he wasn't going to wake up again. Priscilla and Edmond Moore inherited Chauncey Paxton's estate, as well as most of the assets from his various businesses, all of which Priscilla wanted to liquidate as fast as possible, as if the whole terrible idea of it all were trapped in her father's very home and things. Even the house she grew up in, as painful as it was soon sold. With more money now than the two could spend in 5 lifetimes, the Moores sat on their back balcony, feeling the numb, bitter unhelpfulness of all the new wealth and its inability to buy back what you really wanted. Priscilla would give away every single penny to have just 5 more minutes with both her parents now. And Edmond would give all that and more and go into further debt just to see his wife have that short little joy. But, as the famed Wexler writer C. Goodwin Huron said, "Death is the only bill you cannot fit." For months and years, the Moores sat on their back balcony, evening after evening, grieving, thinking, talking, even smoking the occasional cigar or pipe or sipping strawberry wine, trying to make sense of the world around them that seemed so much dimmer now. Priscilla's friends and cousins tried to help as best they could, stopping by often, but even they grew tired of the talks and talks and talks of death and the afterlife. Priscilla didn't hate him for it. She understood. Priscilla and Edmond soon decided not to have children. even though they dreamt of raising a family, speaking of names and numbers in their letters from way back, and even on the balcony in those first-year evenings and mornings. But now they agreed. Why bring more souls into this world, they concluded. More people to have to endure death of their loved ones and even to one day die themselves. Think what you will of the Moors and their reasons for doing or not doing certain things, but it's what they decided. By 1882, the Moors were now known locally as incredibly nice but obsessive people, as the Wexler Tribune wrote. But they were only obsessive about one thing, the afterlife. And what a thing to obsess over, no? One overcast day on the balcony, Priscilla thought of her parents, as she so often did. She wondered what they would think of her now. Could they see her? Would they be proud of how she was living? How she and Edmond were spending their time and inheritance, talking until their voices were hoarse over human mysteries far beyond their control? Priscilla then felt a wave of sorrow. She was still mournful that both her parents were gone, but more so at the thought that she might have gone wayward in all of her grief. Edmond agreed, thinking of his own father, Horatio, and his brother Thomas, who did follow their father's footsteps to become a physician. Edmond wondered if he'd let his life pass him by in the last few years spent in their country castle's safe haven. Then the two talked, speaking of their desires to be a part of the world again, if only in some small way. Anyway. And soon it was settled. For the next several months, the Moors planned and sketched and dreamed. Soon they sent telegrams of inquiry and requests of services and hired as many able-bodied men and women they could afford to help transform the back-rolling meadows of the Moor estate into a paradise on earth. There were gardens as far as the eye could see down either side of the grounds behind the house, with enough vegetables and fruits to feed a small village. There were orchards, vineyards, and even a cidery and winery built to accompany them. There were so many different flowers you could recite 20 poems by William Blake as you walked by them and still have more to see by the time you were done talking. Vivid red trilliums, brilliant swamp buttercups, Venus looking-glasses, purple milkweeds, marsh blue violets, roses, and daffodils. The list went on and on. Priscilla and Edmond had stables built and staffed them with the best trainers and riders on the East Coast. There were walking paths and lantern-lined bridges that lay across the ponds. It was a little heaven on earth. The Moors were elated to have something to occupy their time now. So many beautiful little things to see and explore. Every little thing. But it wasn't just for them. Soon they opened up the grounds to the public. Paxton Moor Gardens, as they called it, in honor of Priscilla's father, as well as Edmond's family. A place of beauty for all of Wexler to marvel at. This brought the Moors a great joy. To have some meaning and purpose again after so much sadness. To see people strolling and smiling. They even hosted events for charities and orphanages and animal shelters every month. Every day was filled with so much discovery and happiness. Priscilla and Edmond both quickly became well-versed in gardening and horseback riding and wine and cider making, and they often led tours around the grounds together, hand in hand, guiding eager visitors through paradise. Each night, for years and years, as activities on the grounds would wind down for the evening, Priscilla and Edmond would hold hands, sipping wine or cider. Then one would say, "I love you," and the other would say, "I love you more." Of course, I don't need to tell you it's double meaning now, but it's worth a smile to say so anyway. M-O-O-R-E. But even still, on one of these tranquil evenings, a few years after Paxton Moor Gardens opened to the public, that age-old topic of discussion came up again. The one nobody can truly escape. You guessed it. The only reason Priscilla brought it up was, oddly, because of the vast amount of butterflies that had started inhabiting the grounds in droves. It was becoming quite the local phenomenon. So much so that one feature article in the Old Jupiter Sun wrote that Wexler now seemed like a beautiful, new, and out-of-the-blue butterfly city. There were all sorts of butterflies around now. White, yellow, orange, blue, but not green. Much to Priscilla's dismay, her locket would have to make do. And it would, for all of her days. Of course, as the gardens attracted the butterflies, the butterfly buzz around town attracted visitors, which, when seen from Priscilla's vantage point, oddly only reminded her of how fleeting life felt. Perhaps even more odd was the fact that it didn't fill her with only sorrow now. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, like trying to catch a cloud. As time went on, Priscilla and Edmond, hand in hand, would talk again and again of not merely life, but the afterlife. What did it really look like? What did it feel like? What did it taste, smell, and sound like from up there? But up where? Clouds? Other worlds? Invisible ones within this one? Could you see people here on Earth? Could you communicate with them? Could you borrow the breeze to wake a loved one up from a summer afternoon nap in a meadow like a neighbor might borrow a cup of sugar? Could you whisper messages of beauty and eternity to the trees, allowing them to interpret what they heard in whatever serene, swaying dance they wanted? Could a piece of your forever self take flight with a butterfly for just a moment, as if flying a kite, for just a few seconds to flap around and bask in all the flowers and lush, green landscape back here once more? Oh, the power of sipping spirits and talking of spiritual things on a balcony in the evening with the one you love by your side. Then that sadness tried to set in again. Not of only losing parents, but each other too now. The fact that no matter how tight you hold someone, eventually they'll have to go. Are there any more heartbreaking words than "till death do you part"? Not to the Moores. One night, Priscilla had a peculiar idea. She whispered it to Edmond, just like they did all those years ago, back in the ballroom in Kent. And just like back then, Edmond laughed and nodded to his wife on the balcony of Moore Manor. That settled it. Priscilla and Edmond made a tear-filled promise to each other. If there was, in fact, a world beyond our own, then whoever should pass away first would send a green butterfly up to the balcony, serving as a rare and unmistakable signal to the other that they were alive and well, whatever that would mean on the other side, be it 1 month, 1 year, or 100 years from then. A green butterfly. When speaking of experiencing things you can't see, was it really so outrageous? Not for the Moores. Not that evening or any other evening after. By 1914, the Moores had enjoyed what most would call a full, fulfilled, and happy life together, full of many joys and victories, friends and festivities, crisp autumns, merry Christmases, and splendid summers together. Each and every night, without exception, would end the same. Lovely little talks into the wee morning hours on the back balcony after a full, honest day of more Paxton garden activities, all the while that same promise in the back of their minds. A green butterfly. Both were terrified either way, as are most, either at the thought of being the first to pass away or being the one left behind to grieve. On Thanksgiving night, 1914, it was Priscilla Paxton Moore who passed away first. According to the archived reports, she died peacefully in her sleep as she and Edmond dozed off on the back balcony. That night, Edmond, in torrents of tears, gave thanks for his wife, Priscilla, and for the years they'd been blessed with together. In the following weeks, Edmond continued to sit on the back balcony alone. His mind kept teetering back and forth about the green butterfly promise. Would he ever see one? What if he didn't? Oh, but what if he did? Strangely, though his heart would be forever broken, it was still beating in his chest. It was beating with the sad but somehow hopeful optimism for whatever the future held. For days and days on end, the 62-year-old Edmond Moore did nothing but watch the balcony railing and wait, searching for any fluttering thing with even the tiniest hint of green. He even strolled the grounds on occasion, only to have more butterfly flowers planted and quickly hurry back to the balcony. He would sleep out there every single night, rain or shine. Even when it snowed, he'd have his staff prepare him a fire in a makeshift pit not 3 feet from him. Still, there was no green butterfly. But that didn't take away his love for her, or the memories. All the beautiful memories. Every little one. Eventually, as much as it pained him as he reflected on it, Edmond Moore thought it only proper that Priscilla should be the one to go first, to set forth into the great unknown, to scout out a new, eternal plot of land, just like she did back here. Until his dying breath, he hoped the last thing he'd see would be a beautiful green butterfly on the stone railing of their beloved balcony. On his last night alive, he did, if only in his final, peaceful dreams. A mere 4 months after Priscilla passed, Edmond Moore died of cardiac arrest in his sleep. Basil Woodruff, one of the groundskeepers, told the Wexler County Times that he almost seemed as if he had a peaceful grin on his face when I found him. Per the Moores' wishes, the estate was left to the city of Wexler to be preserved as a place of peace and beauty for anyone to visit free of charge. In 1973, the Moore estate was officially designated as a historic landmark, and in 1992, it also became a butterfly conservatory. Today, the Moore estate still offers free admission to all, boasting thousands of visitors a month from all over the world. Stop by for a visit and you'll see why. You can bask in so many beautiful things there. Every little thing. You can stroll the grounds and gardens just for the fun of it. You can take horseback riding lessons. You can sample wine and cider. You can even get married there. You can visit Priscilla and Edmond's graves in the historic cemetery. You can tour the house, too. And be sure to take the obligatory picture out on the balcony, keeping with the long-held tourist tradition. And there you have it, Wexler, USA, the Butterfly City. A name that sticks to this very day because of two someones no different than you or me, who loved each other, who talked and laughed and danced and dreamed and cried and built and toiled, and who eventually said goodbye to each other. Oh, and one more thing. If you do happen to visit the Moore estate, be sure to stop by the museum and the old library. You will be amazed at what you see. Preserved in beautiful pen and ink on parchment are the actual letters Priscilla and Edmond wrote to each other, many of which have those lovely parting words at the bottom. I love you more. M-O-O-R-E. But that's not the best part. The centerpiece, the crown jewel of the collection, is a photo, encased in glass and framed in gold. It hangs right above the fireplace. It's a tad grainy and worn out. The photo was taken by a young Japanese exchange student who was visiting the estate and later donated the photograph when he discovered what he captured. It's a picture of the beloved balcony of the Moore estate. Doesn't seem like much at first glance, but if you look closer, you'll see it. There, resting on the old stone railing, mere inches apart from each other, are two butterflies, both as green as can be. What more could you ask for?